Montana Territory, 1871. The first winter nearly killed Wyatt Grange. The second numbed his heart. By the third, he had forgotten the sound of his own voice. In the fourth, he stopped lighting lamps at night, preferring darkness to the emptiness of his cabin walls. During the fifth, he dreamed less. And by the sixth winter, high in the Bitterroot Mountains, silence had become as much a part of him as the scars on his hands. Today, like every day for the past 6 years, he stood at the edge of his property and watched the sun climb over the eastern peaks. Frost clung to his light brown beard, still sparse at 26, as he surveyed the wilderness he called home. A mile of forest separated his cabin from any trail, just the way he wanted it, needed it. Wyatt's Winchester rifle rested comfortably against his shoulder as he scanned for signs of game. He was lean but strong, built by years of solitary survival, his face younger than the hardness in his blue eyes suggested. Those eyes rarely missed anything, a necessary trait when your nearest neighbor was half a day's ride away. The frontier was no place for softness. Wyatt had learned this truth at 20, when he'd watched the Blackfoot raid that claimed his parents and sister at their homestead. He'd been hunting miles away, returning only to find ashes where family had been. That day, something inside him had broken beyond repair, or so he believed. His mind repeated the same truth every morning. Asterisk attachment means vulnerability. Vulnerability means death. Asterisk. As he moved through the forest, Wyatt's boots left solitary tracks in the snow. He allowed himself one brief thought, wondering if this was all life would ever be, before pushing it away with practiced discipline. Survival was enough. It had to be. He had nearly reached the stream when a sound cut through the mountain stillness. A sound so foreign that it stopped him mid-stride. A child's voice. "Mister. Please, mister." Wyatt spun, rifle raised instinctively, to find a small figure struggling through knee-deep snow toward him. A girl, no more than 7 or 8, her face red from cold and exertion. Her woolen coat was too thin for February in the mountains, and her dark braids were dusted with snow. "Mister," she panted, stumbling to a halt 10 feet from him. "Please, you gotta help. My mama's real sick." Wyatt lowered his rifle, but didn't speak. 6 years of silence had made words feel foreign in his throat. The man at the trading post said a mountain man lived up here. The child continued, her breath clouding. "Said you might have medicine. Please, mister. She's burning up with fever." Something sharp twisted in Wyatt's chest. He hadn't spoken to another human in over 3 years, when a lost trapper had stumbled upon his cabin. Even then, he'd communicated with nods and gestures. The girl stepped closer, her brown eyes wide with desperation. "Save my mama, please. She's all I got." Wyatt took a step back, every instinct telling him to retreat to his cabin, to the safety of his isolation. The girl's presence was a violation of everything he'd built, his distance from the world, from pain, from responsibility. But as he looked at her small face, he saw something horrifyingly familiar. The same terror he'd felt watching smoke rise from his family's homestead. His voice, when it finally came, sounded like stone grinding against stone. "Where?" The girl's eyes widened at his response. "Our wagon. Down by the creek crossing. We was heading to Virginia City when Mama got the fever." Wyatt hesitated, looking back toward his cabin, towards safety. "She said not to bring nobody back," the girl added, wringing her mittened hands. "Said people might not be kind. But she's been calling for help in her sleep, and I got scared." 6 winters of solitude had taught Wyatt that survival meant staying uninvolved. But survival wasn't living. And somewhere deep inside, past the layers of ice he'd grown around his heart, something warm and forgotten stirred. He nodded once and gestured for the girl to lead. The wagon sat abandoned by the creek crossing, a mile from where the main trail wound through the foothills. No horse in sight, likely stolen or run off. Wyatt approached cautiously, rifle ready, still half expecting this to be some elaborate trap. Outlaws were known to use women and children as bait. The girl scrambled ahead, climbing into the wagon. "Mama, I brought help." Wyatt paused at the wagon's edge, listening. The only sound was labored breathing from within. Slowly, he climbed up and pushed aside the canvas flap. The interior was neat despite signs of long travel. A woman lay on a narrow bed, her face flushed with fever. Even ill, there was no denying her beauty. She was young, perhaps 22, with a heart-shaped face framed by dark blonde hair that spilled across the pillow. Her eyes fluttered open at their entrance, revealing irises the color of summer sky. "Charlotte?" she whispered, reaching for the girl. "I told you to stay put." "Mama, I found the mountain man," the girl, Charlotte, said proudly. "He's going to help you get better." The woman's gaze drifted to Wyatt, confusion and fear crossing her features. "Sir, we don't need charity." Once I'm on my feet, she tried to sit up but collapsed back with a gasp, her strength clearly failing her. Wyatt moved forward instinctively, pressing a calloused hand to her forehead. The heat radiating from her skin confirmed what he already knew. This woman wouldn't survive another night without help. "I'm Brielle Grantham," she managed, dignity intact despite her condition. "This is my daughter, Charlotte." Wyatt nodded, then glanced around the wagon. He spotted a water barrel, half empty, and moved to fill a cup. His eyes cataloged their supplies. Meager provisions, a few books, a sewing kit, a small trunk of clothes. Everything neat, organized. The belongings of someone who prized order against chaos. He held the cup to Brielle's lips, supporting her head as she drank weakly. "Thank you," she whispered. "We've been traveling west since October. My husband, he passed in St. Louis." Her eyes drifted to her daughter, then back to Wyatt. "We're meeting my brother in Virginia City. He has a store there." Wyatt listened, noting the gaps in her story, the careful way she measured her words despite the fever. She was hiding something, but that was none of his concern. Charlotte tugged at his sleeve. "Can you fix her?" Wyatt stood, decision made. He gestured for the girl to move, then carefully gathered Brielle into his arms, blankets and all. She weighed almost nothing, this woman with the sky-colored eyes. "What are you doing?" Brielle protested weakly, trying to push against his chest. "My cabin," Wyatt said, the words rough from disuse. "Medicine there." Charlotte scrambled to gather what appeared to be their most important belongings, a worn Bible, a small wooden box, a rag doll, before following him out. "Our things," Brielle began. "I'll come back," Wyatt assured her, his voice becoming slightly less strained with use. Each word felt like pulling a nail from wood. The journey back to his cabin took twice as long, burdened as he was. Brielle drifted in and out of consciousness against his chest. Once, her fingers curled into his coat, and she murmured something that sounded like a prayer. Charlotte followed silently, occasionally reaching up to touch her mother's dangling hand. By the time they reached his cabin, Wyatt's arms burned with exertion. He shouldered open the door and carried Brielle to his bed, and used to seeing anyone but himself in this space, especially someone who seemed to bring light into the dim corners merely by her presence. The cabin was small but solidly built. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a rough-hewn table and chair occupied the center, and shelves lined with preserved food, herbs, and supplies covered another wall. It was Spartan but functional, like its owner. Wyatt moved with newfound purpose, stoking the fire before retrieving his medicine box, a leftover from his father, who had learned herb lore from both settlers and natives. He selected dried willow bark for the fever, along with other herbs for a poultice. Charlotte watched with solemn attention as he brewed the bitter tea. "My papa was a doctor," she offered quietly. "He used to make medicines too." Wyatt glanced at her, then at Brielle, connecting pieces of their story. A doctor's wife and daughter, traveling alone. Running from something, perhaps. He helped Brielle drink the tea, noting how she grimaced at the taste, but swallowed obediently. The trust in her eyes, despite her vulnerability, stirred something painful in his chest. It had been so long since anyone had looked at him as anything but a wild mountain hermit. "Rest," he told her simply. Brielle's eyes drifted closed, her breathing still labored but less desperate than before. Wyatt turned to find Charlotte standing awkwardly in the middle of his cabin, clutching her rag doll to her chest. "Are you really a mountain man?" she asked, studying him. "You don't look as scary as the stories." Wyatt almost smiled, an expression so foreign he wasn't sure his face remembered how to form it. "Hungry?" he asked instead. She nodded eagerly. As Wyatt prepared a simple meal of venison stew, he felt the walls he'd built around himself strain under the weight of these unexpected visitors. The girl chattered as she ate, filling his silent cabin with stories of their journey, her father's death from influenza, their hopes for Virginia City. She spoke with the unfiltered honesty of children, revealing more than her mother likely would have approved. Mama cries at night when she thinks I'm sleeping, Charlotte confided, scraping the bottom of her bowl. She says we'll be safe with Uncle Frederick, but I heard her tell the man at the hotel that we're being followed. Wyatt's head snapped up at this. Followed? By whom? Charlotte shrugged. Don't know, but Mama was real scared. That's why we took the mountain trail instead of the main road. The pieces clicked into place. A widow with a child, traveling difficult routes in winter, looking over her shoulder. Someone wanted to find Brielle Grantham, and not for friendly reasons. Wyatt glanced at the sleeping woman, noting the fine quality of her dress despite its travel-worn state, the delicate gold band on her finger. Whatever she was running from, she had brought it to his doorstep. 6 years ago, he would have seen this as confirmation of his belief. Involvement meant danger. But now, watching Charlotte methodically clean her bowl, just as he'd done with his own, he felt something else. A responsibility he hadn't sought but couldn't deny. That night, Wyatt slept in a chair by the fire, his rifle across his lap. Charlotte curled up in a nest of furs beside her mother, and for the first time in 6 years, his cabin felt like something more than shelter. It felt alive. Brielle's fever broke on the 3rd day. Wyatt had maintained his vigil, leaving only to check on their abandoned wagon and to hunt. Each night, he'd told Charlotte stories, halting at first, then with growing confidence as his voice remembered its purpose. Tales of the mountains, of wildlife, of stars. Never of people, never of himself. When Brielle finally opened her eyes with clarity, she found her daughter asleep beside her and Wyatt whittling by the fire, the morning light streaming through the cabin's single window. You saved us, she said softly. Wyatt looked up, his hands stilling on the half-formed wooden horse. You're feeling better. Thanks to you. She struggled to sit up, and he moved to help her, acutely aware of the floral scent still clinging to her hair despite days of illness. I don't know how to repay you. No need. Wyatt returned to his chair, uncomfortable with her gratitude. You and your girl can stay until you're strong enough to travel. Brielle studied him, her blue eyes missing nothing. Charlotte says you've been alone up here for years. She says you hardly talked at first. Wyatt shifted uncomfortably. Your daughter talks enough for 3 people. A smile touched Brielle's lips, transforming her face from merely beautiful to radiant. She does. It's been just the 2 of us since her father died. Sometimes I think she talks to fill the silence he left behind. Something in her tone made Wyatt look up sharply. There was grief there, but something else too. Relief, perhaps. He'd seen enough of life to know that not all marriages were happy ones. We should reach Virginia City within a week, weather permitting, she continued, glancing toward the window where snow was beginning to fall again. My brother has a mercantile there. He's been expecting us since Christmas. The mountain passes will be dangerous for another month, Wyatt said, surprising himself with how many words he was suddenly willing to offer. Spring comes late up here. Brielle's face fell. We can't impose on you that long. And we can't delay. It's important we reach Virginia City as soon as possible. Before Wyatt could respond, Charlotte stirred beside her mother, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Mama, you're better. She threw her arms around Brielle, who winced slightly but held her daughter close. Thanks to Mr. Grange, Brielle said, smoothing Charlotte's tangled hair. Wyatt's been teaching me about tracks and which berries you can eat, Charlotte announced. And he's making me a horse. She pointed to the carving in his hands. Brielle's eyes met his over her daughter's head, warm with gratitude. You've been kind to her. Wyatt looked away, uncomfortable with the emotion in her gaze. She's a good girl. The day passed in domestic quiet, so different from the silence that had defined his existence. Brielle was still weak, but insisted on helping prepare meals. Charlotte flitted between them, bringing warmth to corners of the cabin that had known only shadow for years. That evening, as Charlotte slept, Brielle sat with Wyatt by the fire. She'd insisted on mending his shirts, her way of repaying his kindness, she'd said. Her fingers moved deftly with needle and thread, revealing the practiced skill of a woman accustomed to making do. You never said what brought you to these mountains, she said after a comfortable silence. Wyatt stared into the flames. Nothing brought me here. Everything else drove me away. Brielle's hand stilled. I understand that feeling. Something in her tone made him look up. She wasn't watching him with pity, as he'd expected, but with recognition, as if she too knew what it meant to run from ghosts. What are you running from, Mrs. Grantham? he asked quietly. Her eyes widened slightly. What makes you think I'm running? The mountain trail in winter. No escort. Charlotte mentioned you thought you were being followed. Brielle set aside her mending, her face tightening. She shouldn't have told you that. She's a child. Children notice more than we think. For a long moment, Brielle was silent, weighing her words. My husband's family is influential in St. Louis. When Edward died, his brother decided Charlotte should be raised properly, in their household, under their name. Her hands twisted in her lap. They tried to declare me unfit. When that failed, they offered to buy her from me. Wyatt's jaw tightened. Buy her? A substantial settlement if I would relinquish custody. Brielle's voice was steady, but her eyes blazed with a mother's fury. When I refused, the threats began. We left in the night with what we could carry. And now they're following you. She nodded. I've seen the same man in 3 different towns. Edward's brother's man. That's why we need to reach Frederick in Virginia City. He's arranged new papers, new names. Her eyes met his, vulnerable yet determined. I would die before letting them take her from me. Wyatt understood then. The careful way she organized their belongings, her insistence on moving quickly despite her illness. She wasn't just a mother protecting her child. She was a woman fighting for her very identity against those who would erase it. You'll reach Virginia City, he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. I'll make sure of it. Brielle looked at him with something like wonder. Why would you do that? You don't know us. Wyatt couldn't answer. The truth was, he didn't understand it himself. 6 years of carefully constructed isolation, crumbling because a child had asked for help and a woman had looked at him with sky-blue eyes. Instead, he said simply, get some rest. You're still recovering. As she returned to his bed, leaving him to his chair by the fire, Wyatt confronted an uncomfortable truth. The silence he'd cultivated no longer felt like protection. For the first time in 6 years, it felt like emptiness. A week passed, then 2. February surrendered to March, bringing slightly warmer days but treacherous melting snow that made travel even more dangerous. Brielle regained her strength, and with it came a quiet determination that Wyatt found himself admiring. Life in the cabin found its own rhythm. Mornings, Wyatt taught Charlotte to identify animal tracks and bird calls. Afternoons, Brielle insisted on taking on household tasks, transforming his functional space into something that felt more like a home with each passing day. Evenings, they gathered by the fire, where Brielle sometimes read aloud from one of the books they'd salvaged from the wagon. One night, when Charlotte had fallen asleep early, Brielle found Wyatt on the porch, watching the stars emerge. You never finished telling me, she said, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the chill. About why you're here alone. Wyatt was silent for so long she might have thought he hadn't heard her. But finally, his voice came, low and rough with memory. I was 20 when the Blackfoot raided our homestead. My father, mother, sister, all gone in an afternoon while I was hunting. He kept his eyes on the distant mountains, dark against the night sky. I tracked the war party for 3 days. Killed 4 of them before they wounded me and left me for dead. Brielle's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the night. When I recovered, there was nothing left to go back to. So I came here. He gestured to the wilderness around them. Found that people only bring pain. Silence doesn't. Brielle was quiet for a long moment before speaking. My husband wasn't a kind man, she said finally. He married me for my family's connections, then resented me when my father lost everything in bad investments. When Charlotte was born, he was disappointed she wasn't a son. She drew the blanket tighter. The night he died, he'd been drinking. Said terrible things about Charlotte, about me. We argued, and he struck me, not for the first time. He stormed out into a snowstorm. They found him the next morning, frozen in an alley. She turned to face Wyatt fully. I mourned the man he could have been, but I felt relief at being free of who he was. Does that make me a terrible person? No, Wyatt said simply. It makes you honest. Their eyes met in the darkness, an understanding passing between them that needed no words. They were both survivors of different kinds of violence, his sudden and bloody, hers prolonged and hidden. Both had built walls for protection. Charlotte adores you, Brielle said softly. She's never had a man treat her with kindness. Something warm and unfamiliar bloomed in Wyatt's chest. She's easy to be kind to. As are you, Brielle replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Despite how hard you try to appear otherwise. Before he could respond, she had returned inside, leaving him with stars above and thoughts he'd been avoiding for days. Chief among them, what would happen when the passes cleared and they continued to Virginia City? The thought of returning to his silence, his solitude, no longer brought comfort. It brought dread. The first sign of trouble came as March gave way to April. Wyatt was checking his trapline when he spotted boot prints in the mud near the creek. Too large to be Brielle's, too distinct to be old. Someone had been watching the cabin. He followed the tracks for nearly a mile before they joined a larger set of prints, at least 3 men, possibly 4, moving with purpose through his territory. One set matched the prints he'd found earlier. A scout, reporting back. Wyatt returned to the cabin at a run, finding Brielle hanging laundry while Charlotte gathered kindling nearby. Inside, he ordered, scanning the tree line. "Both of you. Now." Brielle didn't question him, immediately calling Charlotte and hurrying into the cabin. Once they were inside, Wyatt barred the door and began checking his weapons. "What is it?" Brielle asked, her face pale. "Tracks. For men, headed this way." He loaded his Winchester, then checked his revolver. "One's been watching the cabin." Brielle sank into a chair, her hand covering her mouth. "It's them. Edward's family." Charlotte looked between them, fear dawning on her young face. "The bad men Mama said were chasing us?" "When did you last see the man following you?" Wyatt asked, moving to the window to scan the approaches to the cabin. "Rock Springs, about a month ago," Brielle said, pulling Charlotte close. "A man with a scar across his chin. I thought we'd lost him when we took the mountain route." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "These mountains are my home. I know every trail, every pass." He turned to her. "Decision made. There's a hunting cabin a day's ride south. We'll go there tonight, stay until they give up and leave." "And then?" Brielle asked softly. He met her eyes. "Then I'll take you to Virginia City myself." That evening, they packed only essentials. Wyatt saddled his horse, securing their supplies, while keeping watch for movement in the forest. They would travel light and fast, using trails only he knew. As darkness fell, they set out, Brielle and Charlotte on his horse, Wyatt leading on foot. The night was clear, stars bright enough to light their path. They moved silently, Charlotte's usual chatter subdued by the gravity of their situation. They had traveled perhaps 5 miles when Wyatt froze, raising his hand for silence. In the distance, the unmistakable glow of torches moved through the trees, headed toward his cabin. "They're searching for you," he whispered, helping Brielle dismount so he could lead the horse through a particularly steep section. "We'll circle around to the south, use the ridge to mask our trail." Brielle nodded, her face resolute in the moonlight. "I won't let them take her." "Nor will I," Wyatt promised, surprised by the ferocity he felt. In the weeks since Charlotte had found him by the stream, something fundamental had shifted inside him. These two had awakened feelings he'd thought long dead: protectiveness, concern, and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. They traveled through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horse and allow Charlotte to sleep in Brielle's arms. By dawn, they had reached the hunting cabin, little more than a crude shelter, but secure and hidden in a stand of pines overlooking a small lake. As Brielle settled Charlotte inside, Wyatt stood guard, watching their back trail. No sign of pursuit yet, but he knew these men wouldn't give up easily. Not if they'd tracked Brielle all the way from St. Louis. "They won't find us here," he assured Brielle when she joined him. "Few know this place exists." She studied him in the early light, reaching up to touch his cheek with gentle fingers. "Why are you doing this, Wyatt? You could have sent us on our way, returned to your peace." He caught her hand, holding it against his face. There was no peace, only silence. His eyes met hers, vulnerability raw in his gaze. "You brought something back that I thought was gone forever." "What?" she whispered. "Hope," he said simply. The kiss, when it came, felt like the first breath after years of drowning. Brielle's lips were soft against his, her hands steady as they framed his face. Wyatt pulled her closer, 6 years of isolation dissolving in the warmth of her embrace. When they parted, Brielle's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I never thought I would feel safe with a man again," she confessed. "I never thought I'd want someone in my life again," he countered, his forehead resting against hers. A small voice from the cabin doorway broke their moment. "Does this mean you're coming with us to Virginia City?" Charlotte asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Wyatt and Brielle exchanged looks, half embarrassment, half amusement at being caught. "We'll talk about that later, sweetheart," Brielle said, extending her hand to her daughter. "First, we need to stay safe here for a few days." But safety, like happiness, proved fleeting in the wilderness. On their third day at the hunting cabin, disaster struck. Wyatt had gone to check traps and survey the area when he spotted smoke rising from the direction of his main cabin. He raced back to find Brielle packing their few belongings, her face tight with worry. "I saw it too," she said before he could speak. "They've burned your home." Fury rose in Wyatt's chest, not for the structure itself, but for the violation. These men had destroyed the sanctuary he'd built with his own hands, all to hunt down a woman and child whose only crime was wanting freedom. "We need to move," he said grimly. "They'll search outward from the cabin. It's only a matter of time before they find this place." Brielle nodded, her practical nature asserting itself. "Where will we go?" "There's an old mining settlement 2 days west. We can get supplies there, then take the South Pass toward Virginia City." Wyatt checked his ammunition. "We'll leave at dusk." But as afternoon shadows lengthened across the lake, Charlotte's excited voice carried from outside where she'd been gathering firewood. "Mama, Mr. Wyatt, there's a deer at the lake." Wyatt reached the door just as the gunshot cracked across the water. Charlotte screamed, dropping her kindling as she ran toward the cabin. Behind her, mounted men emerged from the trees at the lake's edge. "Get inside," Wyatt shouted, raising his rifle. Charlotte bolted past him as he fired a warning shot that kicked up dirt near the lead rider's horse. "That's far enough," he called out, positioning himself in the doorway, Charlotte safely behind him with Brielle. The men halted their horses, and the leader, a broad-shouldered man in an expensive coat, raised his hand. "We mean no harm to you, mountain man. We only want what's ours." "Nothing here belongs to you," Wyatt replied coldly. The man smiled, revealing gold teeth. "The girl is a Grantham. She belongs with her father's family, not with that woman." He spat the last word, his contempt obvious. Brielle stepped forward, one hand on Wyatt's arm. "Harrison," she acknowledged, her voice steady despite the fear Wyatt could feel in her trembling fingers. "You have no right to Charlotte. The courts gave me full custody." Harrison Grantham laughed. "Courts can be persuaded to reconsider, especially with new evidence." He gestured to one of his men. "We have sworn statements testifying to your instability following Edward's death. Your flight only confirms it." "You threatened me," Brielle fired back. "You tried to take my daughter by force." "A mother's delusions," Harrison said smoothly, addressing Wyatt. "Edward's death affected her mind. We only want what's best for the child, a proper upbringing with her father's family, wealth, education. Surely you can see that's better than life as a fugitive?" Wyatt felt Charlotte press against his back, her small hands clutching his coat. "I want to stay with Mama," she whispered, loud enough for all to hear. Harrison's face hardened. "Children don't know what's best for them. Neither do men who burn down cabins and shoot at little girls," Wyatt replied, his rifle unwavering. "That cabin was an accident. We were seeking information," Harrison said dismissively. "As for the shot, Wilkes here is an excitable sort. It won't happen again." He fixed Wyatt with a calculating look. "I'm prepared to compensate you for your inconvenience. $500 to walk away from this." The offer hung in the air, a test of what kind of man Wyatt Grange truly was. 6 years ago, he might have considered it. What were a widow and child to him, against the dangers of opposing wealthy, connected men? But that was before Charlotte had found him in the forest, before Brielle had looked at him with trust in her eyes, before he had remembered what it meant to protect something more valuable than himself. "My home is worth more than that," Wyatt said evenly. "And these two aren't for sale at any price." Harrison's expression darkened. "Don't be a fool, mountain man. This doesn't concern you." "It does now." Harrison studied him, then nodded slightly to his men. "We'll return at dawn. Have the girl ready, or we'll take her by force." He turned his horse. "Think carefully about your choice, sir. There are 4 of us, one of you." As they rode away, Wyatt closed the door, his mind racing. Brielle stood pale but composed, one arm around Charlotte. "We need to leave now," she said. "Use the darkness to get away." Wyatt shook his head. "They'll be watching the trails. Our best chance is to make a stand here." He looked around the small cabin, assessing its defensive capabilities. "This place has thick walls and a good position. I know this territory better than they do. I won't let you die for us, Brielle said fiercely. You're not letting me do anything, Wyatt replied, meeting her gaze. I'm choosing this. Choosing you. He knelt before Charlotte, whose brave face couldn't quite hide her fear. And I'm choosing you, little one. No one is taking you from your mother. Charlotte threw her arms around his neck. I knew you'd protect us. I told Mama you would, that first day in the snow. Over her head, Wyatt's eyes met Brielle's. Something passed between them, an understanding, a promise. We'll fight together, Brielle said, straightening her shoulders. Tell me what to do. As night fell, they prepared their defense. Wyatt moved furniture to create barriers, showed Brielle how to reload his second rifle, and carefully explained to Charlotte where to hide if fighting broke out. They ate a simple meal, the three of them sitting close together, drawing strength from each other. When Charlotte finally fell asleep, Brielle turned to Wyatt in the firelight. If something happens to me, she began softly. He stopped her with a finger to her lips. It won't. If it does, she insisted, promise me you'll take Charlotte to my brother in Virginia City. Frederick will raise her well. Wyatt took her hands. I promise. But it won't come to that. Brielle searched his face. You were alone for so long. Why risk everything for us? He considered his answer carefully, wanting to give her truth. When I lost my family, I thought the only way to survive was to need no one, to feel nothing. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. But that's not survival. It's just existing. And now, she whispered, now I have something worth fighting for. He drew her close, his kiss a promise. Tomorrow, when this is over, I want to talk about what comes next. For all three of us. Brielle's eyes shone with unshed tears. I would like that very much. They kept watch in turns through the night, waiting for dawn and whatever it would bring. First light revealed empty shores around the lake. Wyatt, who had taken the last watch, studied the tree line with growing unease. Harrison and his men should have been visible, yet there was no sign of them. Brielle joined him at the window, Charlotte still sleeping. Could they have left? Not likely, Wyatt said grimly. The crack of a rifle cut him off, the bullet splintering the window frame inches from his head. Brielle gasped, dropping to the floor as Wyatt pulled her down. They're in the trees to the east, he said, crawling to his rifle. Wake Charlotte. Get her to the back room. More shots followed, peppering the cabin as Brielle rushed to her daughter. Wyatt returned fire, aiming at muzzle flashes among the trees. He counted 4 separate positions. They had split up to surround the cabin. Surrender the girl, and you can both walk away. Harrison's voice carried across the clearing. Never, Brielle shouted back, her mother's fury overriding caution. A new volley of bullets struck the cabin, one finding its way through a chink in the logs to embed in the far wall. Too close. Wyatt assessed their situation rapidly. The cabin had only 2 rooms, the main area and a small storage space at the back. 1 door, 2 windows. They were pinned down, but the thick log walls provided good protection. If they could hold out long enough, perhaps Harrison would realize the cost was too high. But that hope died as smoke began to drift through the cabin. They've set the roof on fire, Wyatt realized with horror. Thatching at the rear of the cabin was already beginning to burn. Brielle emerged from the back room, Charlotte behind her. What do we do? Wyatt made a swift decision. There's a trapdoor under the bearskin rug. It leads to a root cellar. Get down there with Charlotte. What about you? Fear made Brielle's voice sharp. I'll cover you, then follow. He met her eyes. Trust me. As Brielle moved the rug and opened the trapdoor, Wyatt reloaded his rifle. The smoke was thickening, making it hard to see, hard to breathe. Charlotte coughed as her mother helped her down the ladder into the darkness below. Brielle, Wyatt called, and she paused, looking back at him from the ladder. I love you. Both of you. Her eyes widened, then softened with understanding. We love you too. As she disappeared below, Wyatt turned back to the windows. The fire was spreading faster now, consuming the dry wood of the roof. He had minutes, not hours. Taking a deep breath, he fired rapidly at each of the positions where Harrison's men were stationed, forcing them to duck for cover. Then, seizing his moment, he bolted for the door, bursting outside with rifle raised. Gunfire erupted immediately. Wyatt felt a searing pain in his side, but kept moving, diving behind a woodpile at the corner of the cabin. Blood seeped through his shirt, but the wound wasn't fatal. Not yet. He's out, a voice shouted. Where's the woman and girl? Wyatt fired at the voice, gratified to hear a cry of pain in response. Free left. The cabin was fully ablaze now, flames licking skyward. From his position, Wyatt could see the root cellar's exterior entrance, a sloped door partially hidden by brush on the far side. If Brielle and Charlotte could reach it unnoticed. A movement to his right caught his attention. One of Harrison's men was creeping toward the cabin, probably thinking Brielle and Charlotte were still inside. Wyatt took careful aim and fired. The man fell. To left. Pain was making his vision swim, but Wyatt forced himself to focus. He needed to draw attention away from the root cellar. Taking a deep breath, he broke cover and ran toward the lake, firing as he went. Bullets kicked up dirt around him. One grazed his arm, another his leg, but he kept moving. From the corner of his eye, he saw the root cellar door push open slightly. Brielle's face appeared, then vanished as she assessed the situation. Wyatt reached the shore, collapsing behind a fallen tree. Blood loss was making him weak, but he wasn't finished yet. He spotted Harrison and the remaining gunmen advancing cautiously from the tree line, using the burning cabin as a backdrop. Grange. Harrison called. Where are they? Where's the girl? Wyatt didn't answer, saving his strength. The lake stretched before him, the morning sun sparkling on its surface. Behind him, the beautiful life he'd just discovered was trying to escape to safety. With steady hands, Wyatt took aim at Harrison. The shot rang out, and Harrison stumbled, clutching his shoulder. The last gunman fired wildly in Wyatt's direction, splintering the log beside his head. And then, unexpectedly, another shot, from a different direction. The gunman collapsed. Wyatt turned in confusion to see Brielle standing at the edge of the trees, his second rifle in her hands, determination etched on her face. Charlotte was nowhere in sight, safely hidden, he hoped. Harrison, wounded but still dangerous, raised his pistol toward Brielle. Wyatt lunged from cover, tackling him just as the gun discharged. They fell together, wrestling for control. Despite his injuries, Wyatt's mountain strength prevailed. He pinned Harrison's gun hand, forcing it to the ground. It's over, Wyatt gasped, blood staining his shirt. They're not yours to take. Harrison's face contorted with rage. The Granthams always get what they want. Not this time. Wyatt wrenched the pistol from his grip and stood, swaying slightly. Not ever again. Brielle was suddenly beside him, supporting his weight. You're hurt. Worth it. He managed, leaning into her strength. They secured Harrison with rope from the cabin's remains, then retrieved Charlotte from her hiding place in a hollow log near the root cellar. Brielle's contingency plan if they became separated. As the adrenaline faded, Wyatt's wounds demanded attention. Brielle helped him to the lakeshore, cutting away his shirt to reveal the damage. The bullet had passed through his side, missing vital organs, but leaving him weak from blood loss. You need a doctor, she said, pressing clean cloth to the wound. Wyatt shook his head. The mining settlement. We can make it. Charlotte appeared with his canteen. Don't die, she said simply, her eyes huge with worry. Please. Wyatt managed a smile. Not planning on it, little one. Not now that I've found you both. They bound Harrison securely to a tree, leaving him supplies and water. The law in the nearest town could deal with him. After they were safely away, the other men would not trouble them again. With Brielle's help, Wyatt mounted his horse. She climbed up behind him, her arms secure around his waist, while Charlotte rode before him, small hands clutching the saddle horn. Together, they turned west, toward the mining settlement, toward help, toward their future. Virginia City, Montana Territory, 1872. The mercantile bell jingled as the door opened, admitting afternoon sunlight and a small whirlwind in the form of Charlotte Grange. At 8 years old, she had grown an inch taller in the months since they'd arrived, and her confidence had blossomed like the spring flowers now dotting the mountainsides. Papa, she called, weaving through displays of dry goods. Uncle Frederick says you promised to help with the furniture delivery. Wyatt looked up from the account books he'd been reviewing, smiling at his adopted daughter. The word, Papa, still filled him with wonder each time she used it, a title he'd never expected to bear. Did I make that promise? He asked seriously. Or did you volunteer me? Charlotte grinned, revealing a newly missing tooth. Both? Maybe. That's what I thought. He ruffled her hair affectionately. Tell your uncle I'll be there directly. As Charlotte skipped back outside, Wyatt closed the ledger and stood, stretching his tall frame. The bullet wounds had healed well over the past months, leaving only scars to remind him of that desperate morning by the lake. He moved to the store's front window, watching the bustle of Virginia City's Main Street. Spring had brought new miners, new settlers, new opportunities. Frederick Grantham's mercantile was thriving, especially since taking on a partner who knew the mountain territories and their needs intimately. The arrangement had worked better than any of them could have hoped. Frederick had welcomed them warmly, relieved to find his sister and niece alive, and grateful to Wyatt for protecting them. When he'd offered Wyatt partnership in the store, it had seemed natural to accept. The mountains would always be his first home, but he'd discovered that home wasn't necessarily a place. Sometimes it was people. The back door opened, and Brielle entered, carrying a tray with coffee. The afternoon light caught the simple gold band on her finger, matching the one Wyatt wore. 3 months married, and still he found himself watching her with disbelief that such happiness could be his. "Charlotte said Frederick is looking for you," she said, setting down the tray. "Apparently I promised to help with a furniture delivery I don't recall volunteering for," Wyatt replied, drawing her into his arms. Brielle laughed, the sound still the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard. "That sounds like our daughter's negotiating skills at work." "Our daughter," he repeated, savoring the words. "I never imagined having a family again." "Nor I," Brielle admitted, resting her head against his chest. "At least, not one built on love rather than obligation." Wyatt kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Any regrets? About leaving St. Louis? About choosing a former mountain hermit?" She looked up at him, her blue eyes clear and certain. "Only that we didn't find you sooner." The last of Harrison Grantham and his men had been dealt with by territorial justice. With solid evidence of their attempts to kidnap Charlotte and their attack on the cabin, the judge had ensured they would spend years behind bars. The Grantham family back east, unwilling to endure public scandal, had formally relinquished any claim to Charlotte. They were safe. They were free. And most miraculously of all, they were happy. "I should go help Frederick," Wyatt said reluctantly, not wanting to leave the circle of her arms. Brielle smiled up at him. "Go. But come home for supper. I have news I want to share." Her hand drifted briefly to her stomach, a gesture so subtle he almost missed it. But he didn't. His eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Are you?" he whispered, hardly daring to hope. Her smile was radiant. "The doctor confirmed it this morning. By winter, Charlotte will have a little brother or sister." Joy beyond words filled Wyatt's heart as he gathered Brielle close, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you, more than I ever thought possible. And I love you," she whispered against his lips. "My mountain man who lived in silence until a little girl brought him back to life." Outside, Charlotte's voice called impatiently for her father. Wyatt and Brielle shared one more kiss before parting, both smiling at their daughter's persistence. As Wyatt stepped out into the sunshine to join Charlotte, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. 6 winters of silence had nearly frozen his heart beyond recovery. But a child's plea, "Save my mama," had broken through the ice, awakening him to the possibility that even in a harsh world, love could take root and flourish. The silence was gone now, replaced by Charlotte's chatter, Brielle's laughter, the bustle of the store, and the promise of a baby's cries come winter. And in that beautiful noise, Wyatt Grange had found his true home at last.